From the Toronto Star, I'm Adrian Chung, and this matters. We're right in the thick of the Euro Championships, one of the biggest international tournaments on the calendar. Chants of football coming home in England, Fratelli d'Italia belting out in Italy, dreams of an underdog story for the ages in Denmark. But in Canada, we're used to picking another nation to cheer on. The Canadian women's national team is consistently one of the best football teams in the world. The men's team? Over the years, there's been less to get excited about. For all of Canada's sporting history, passion, and money, the men's team has only ever qualified for the World Cup once.
The final whistle! Canada has qualified for World Cup 86, defeating Honduras by a score of 2-1.
On This Matters, in the middle of some footy fever this summer, we slide tackle Canada's men's national team. Joining us is Brendan Dunlop, Canadian football journalist and host of the Toronto Star's Euro 2020 podcast, Headers and Footers. Canada's not a football superpower yet, but Brendan will explain why there's already huge hopes for this incoming golden generation of Canadian football. Brendan, it's great to talk to you and have you on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I've been happy to do this crossover.
You know, it's been fantastic listening to you on Headers and Footers, the daily breakdowns of the Euros. I know you're a massive Portugal supporter. Champions 2016 knocked out this time. Has the sting worn off yet?
It never really wears off until the tournament is over.
Yeah.
But you know what? Honestly, for the neutral, this has been such an incredible tournament. And that isn't always the case. In fact, international soccer has changed over the years in the sense that it's not the most attractive soccer all the time. And you see that the best competition is in the Champions League. And our comparison every 4 years, every 2 years when the Euros and the World Cup comes around is now what we see in the Champions League. And that's just not the level. The same parity and quality just simply is not there. But at these Euros so far, it has been thrilling. And the fact that, to see 2 3-3 games on the exact same day, having never seen a 3-3 scoreline at the European Championships ever. It's just been pretty incredible. But if you're a fan of one of the big boys, France or Portugal, then it's been a shorter and a more painful tournament than you were hoping for.
So let's talk about football in Canada. You followed and reported on football in Canada for over a decade now. Putting aside, the results of the men's team itself for just a moment, talking about the state of the game, how has the interest and knowledge about football grown in this country?
I think the interest in the game has grown a lot. I think you see, based on the participation numbers across the country, soccer being one of the most participated sports per capita in the Western world, which is pretty incredible for the game. I do think that, from a media landscape perspective, it's changed considerably as the landscape of media has changed. I don't know if it's as accessible as it used to be. That's a conversation that I have quite often. I think about, when I was a kid and Soccer Saturday with Graham Leggett was the show, and it came on before the 10 o'clock matches that weren't aired. It was on, at 9 to 10, it would preview what was coming up, and then you couldn't see those actual games. Then when Sportsnet got the Premier League contract, that made Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern. That is a staple, I think, for a lot of sports fans, not just soccer fans, and that became a regular thing. And you don't have the Premier League consistently on television, and I feel like television is still, the major access point. So as it's changed and it's split to go on streaming services, I think that the soccer loving audience will follow it wherever it goes. But as a fan wanting to see the sport grow and someone that, has a real passion for it, I want people to be able to see it. And it does feel as though that it's not as accessible in the last few years as it has been. I think the coverage has improved considerably. Don't get me wrong. The professionals in this country covering it, the job that One Soccer has done in growing the Canadian game and focusing specifically on the Canadian Premier League and giving it, a studio shine and a coverage attention, similar to the way ESPN gives NCAA college football that same spotlight and attention to really grow the brand, and similar to how TSN did with the CFL as well. I think that's been special, and it's going to go a long way in growing it. But I think we're seeing the trajectory that the men's national team is on now, and then where the women's national team has been for a long time. I would like to see the access and the media attention be bigger than it seems to be.
For sure. Yeah. It seems like at the international level for these big international tournaments, there is a certain level of more accessibility. I mean, you see more people getting into the game, and maybe that's just a reflection of Toronto and how diverse this city is. But, I love how every nationality shows up and shows out for these tournaments. We see the car flags and the honking. And when it comes to rooting interest, of course, many Canadians turn to their ancestries or where their parents are from to support that team. And I also wonder how much of that is tied to an entire generation of Canadian footy fans who have rarely seen the Canadian men's team at a major international tournament. Do you think that plays into it of we just rarely see that representation at the men's game, and so we pick another country?
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I mean, 1986 was the last time the Canadian men's national team was at the World Cup, and that was the year I was born. And talk about access, I grew up in Windsor, Ontario, so I still don't understand weather in Celsius, actually. Huge American influence, American media influence. And the U.S. men's national team was my introduction to international soccer because they were accessible. I could see them play at the Pontiac Silverdome. There was quite a few matches that they had catered to the Detroit audience ahead of USA 94. They were on ABC. They were on television consistently. And my connection to Portugal is my mother is Portuguese. It was the place of her birth. So I do have that connection that many Torontonians and many Canadians do to some ancestral tie to loving the game. But, the Canadian men's national team is at a level now that they've never been at. And it is the most exciting team and the most talented team with the most quality that this side has ever had. So I do hope that the Canadians get on board and fall in love with this team before the World Cup comes here in 2026, because the way things are going on the pitch, it's going to be a very, very exciting time. A few years ago, we would have said, they'll be there. They'll only qualify because they're hosting it. That's the only way to get in. But they might qualify for Qatar in 2022 next year. With Alphonso Davies and Jonathan David, Jonathan Osorio, Richie Larea. What I think is so great is, I just named 2 Toronto FC players there, but to have Major League Soccer players sharing the spotlight with players who are shining at big leagues in Europe. That is what the U.S. men's national team has grown to do over the last 20 years that I'm speaking about. And you see the leaps and bounds that, they've made since hosting the World Cup in 1994. I think that there's going to be such a spark and such a boost to the game in this country because of 2026. And I guess I'm just anxious to see that start sooner because I know that a lot of the ingredients are there to make 2026 really special.
Yeah. Do you think this is a golden generation of Canadian men's footballers? I mean, you listed off a few names there, Alphonso Davies, Jonathan Davids. These are guys really shining on the biggest European stages.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it used to be special just to see Canadians playing in leagues like France and Germany and Turkey and Scotland. And this year, you've got players winning trophies in all of those countries. Kyle Larin and Atiba Hutchison at Besiktas, one of the biggest teams in Turkey, the champions this year. At Lille, Jonathan David, who made a big money move from a Belgian side this summer. And didn't start very well. I think he went 10 games without a goal, but his coach backed him, and he was on a team that was young and growing and focused on developing players and recognized his skill. And Lille go on to be champions.
Poke through for Jonathan David, and Lille take the lead. 9 minutes and 20 seconds on the clock, and Lille's number 9 breaks through.
In a league where PSG, one of the richest clubs in the world, can literally buy the title every year. For Lille to have topped them, in an incredible season that 2020, 2021 has been, for Jonathan David to be not just a part of that, but a key part of that team, in addition to Alphonso Davies, who in 2020 was named to the FIFA Best 11 as the best left back in the world, a position he'd only started playing 9 months before. I mean, this is just incredible. And those are only a handful of guys, as I mentioned. Wotherspoon at St. Johnstone, Scott Arfield at Rangers, having won the title there as well. It's just amazing to see Canadian players winning trophies in some of the best leagues in the world, and the game will only grow because of that.
Yeah, I remember Alphonso Davies basically skating through the Barca squad last year, and you're like, this is a Canadian, right? This guy's basically a teenager. Incredible.
Yeah, honestly, when he was named to the best 11, I think that for me as a Canadian was the proudest moment. I mean, watching him win the Bundesliga was incredible. Watching him start in the Champions League and introduce himself to the world when Bayern Munich played Chelsea, and then again in the bubble in Lisbon when he torched Nelson Semedo and Barcelona.
Skipping run by Alphonso Davies. Dropped his shoulder and went away. See you later. Brilliant run by Davies. Sensational! Sensational! Sensational!
and Bayern just ran up the scoreline. To see him win the Champions League, watching that final, I felt like I was watching a relative. I was so giddy. I was yelling at the TV more than usual. I really wanted him to win, and to see him do that was super special. But the recognition, it was actually just the tweet or the Instagram post of the 11 best players that were named. It's the annual awards that FIFA dole out, and to see him there with Ronaldo and Messi and Sergio Ramos and players that you would never have a Canadian next to unless it was some type of marketing campaign. And this was a legit recognition of his exceptional season and incredible talent. And it's only going to get better for him. He's 20 years old, playing at one of the best teams in the world, who've fully committed to him and given him a contract extension until, I think it runs now until 2025. But I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a new one in the near future. As his game grows, the Canadian quality increases.
We'll be right back. As we record this, Canada is ranked number 70 in FIFA's world rankings. As you mentioned, we've only ever been to one World Cup in 1986. I know that this is a complex answer, but why, in your opinion, has it been so hard for the men's team to find that consistent success at a top international level?
Yeah, there's definitely layers to it. I mean, soccer is an interesting game in itself. And you look at other countries in the world who have a professional team structure that, Manchester United, one of the biggest teams in the world, one of the biggest brands, they have a side of 8-year-olds, an under 8 side, and they have an under 11s and under 13s and 14s and throughout the entire youth level, as do the other 20 Premier League clubs, or almost all other 20 Premier League clubs, and another 50 beyond that. And there's a professional academy system that helps cultivate and develop talent. And in North America, sports, as we see, especially in hockey, are increasingly privatized. And that has had a real impact on the growth of the Canadian game. It's also very splintered. I think between the provinces, there's a lot of different visions. And there is one shared goal of making the game better. But for a long time, other regions and other organizations haven't been able to kind of get on the same page in terms of development. So that has been slower, and that has kind of hampered it in a lot of ways. I don't think that, the Canadian sports landscape, youth sports landscape, has done a fantastic job of being inclusive and really, including people from different walks of life and from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And as the game becomes more and more privatized, you're making it harder and less accessible, I think, for a lot of communities. And that is one of the reasons why Canada, an incredibly diverse, multicultural place, hasn't truly been able to cultivate and make the best use of all the potential talent in this country. So coaching is another thing, talking about these professional academies in Europe and a lot of these other countries who invest so much in coaching, as well as invest in youth development. And in Canada, it's just been a much smaller slice of the pie. So as the game improves, coaching in this country has improved as well. That's really going to be the biggest. As the coaching gets better, the players get better, and there's been more and more investment in that lately. But for the last 30 years, there just hasn't been enough investment from the federal level and from the corporate level to replicate what happens in Europe when you have an entire structure of professional teams investing in developing players. Having not had that here, we are steps and steps behind, but they're closing the gaps in a lot of ways. The Canadian Premier League, honestly, is a massive step in that, because you give a lot of players who may have been in professional academy structures in Toronto or Montreal and Vancouver and discarded at 16 or 18, or maybe even, made the second team and played in the USL, and then their dream comes to an end. Well, now they have an opportunity to play in Canada in a professional environment, and one of the 8 teams in the Canadian Premier League, in the CPL, and further their career and keep the door open. And I think that the measurement of that, truly it will be immeasurable how important the Canadian Premier League will be for Canadian development. And where we are right now, you can see with players getting call-ups to the national team, Marco Carducci, who plays for Cavalry, the CPL team based in Calgary, to be on a national team and play CONCACAF opposition and play alongside guys like Jonathan David and Alphonso Davies. That's only going to make him better, and he can take a lot of that knowledge and experience back to his club and make the players around him better. And that's truly how the game improves. So to see what the CPL has been able to do in very difficult times with COVID, the CPL season just kicked off this past weekend as we record this. I have really high hopes for the CPL, and I'm very excited for the opportunities that it's giving Canadian players.
I don't know if it's a one-to-one analog, but, you look at the US and the development of the MLS game, and I wonder if the Canadian Premier League can be the same sort of outlet that maybe not right away, but in 5 years, in 10 years, that this is a league that, like you said, is an outlet for really talented Canadian players to continue playing the game.
Yeah, it's an absolutely great comparison, actually, because you look at when the MLS was created around the World Cup in USA 94, after that, and it launched in 96, the intention was to have a league where American players would get first choice opportunities rather than having to go to Europe and knock on the door and, try and get in at a multitude of clubs there. But it's much more difficult, when you are a foreigner knocking on the door in another country trying to get an opportunity. So to be able to do it at home, it's helped the U.S. men's national program considerably. And, when Jurgen Klinsmann was the coach, and Jurgen Klinsmann, famous for his German successes and having played at Tottenham forever, he thought that American players who played in MLS were, doing themselves a disservice, that they should really be testing themselves in Europe. And it was a real split as to, well, you can, play like Michael Bradley, who obviously plays in Toronto, but is American. You can still play in your home league and, have a successful career and develop your game and improve and not have to go to Europe to do that. And there are some players who, want that taste of Europe and a lot of players who don't. And the American team, I think, is a great example of, a balance of allowing the best who want to go to Europe opportunity to be in the shop window, but at the same time being able to play domestically and play close to home and still play at a competitive level as Major League Soccer has continued to improve as it's grown the quality of the league in comparison to 2007 when Toronto FC was the first Canadian team to kick off in MLS. The quality of the league has improved considerably and it's only getting better.
I think about sort of the fits and starts of what it means to be in such a highly competitive international circuit. And, the big peak is obviously the 2000 CONCACAF Gold Cup win. That was, one of the first major titles for Canadian soccer.
Nothing was going to stop this being Canada's day. 2-0 was the final score, with Forrest saving another penalty for good measure.
And then I think any person who follows Canadian soccer will remember 2012 against Honduras, right? Canada had a chance to qualify for the World Cup in Brazil for 2014. One game left in the qualifying stages. You take it away, Brendan. That was a tough moment for the national team, but it seems like there's a lot of peaks and valleys, but for the first time, it's an upward trajectory. It looks like things are getting better, a lot better.
Things are a lot better than 8-1 there, that game against Honduras. Yeah. When Canadian soccer fans see the numbers 8-1 in any reference, be it an elevator reference, be it a phone number, when Canadian soccer fans see 8-1, they definitely cringe.
I think I turned it off halfway through. I just I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. Like for them, for the players, I felt bad for them. I felt bad for us. It was tough, yeah.
That's what makes this year so special because Canada, the men's national team, has just qualified for the last stage of World Cup qualifying for the first time in over 20 years. And that was what just a tie against Honduras and that fateful day in 2012 that you're referring to, a tie would have done that. A tie would have got them to the final stage of World Cup qualifying. And they weren't able to do it. And they were embarrassed in just a horrendous fashion. In difficult conditions, the thing about this region, Canada and Mexico and the United States play in CONCACAF, is it really is unlike a lot of other regions. It's not the parity that you see in South America, both on the playing field and off the field. That just doesn't exist playing in this region. So to go to a lot of those stadiums and a lot of those countries, those facilities, the conditions, the fans, it really is a test that not a lot of Canadian players have in other circumstances. So you've seen over the years how difficult, playing in some of those countries can be. This year, with the unique circumstances of COVID and not being able to play all of those matches in those destinations, the Canadian team took advantage in this qualifying stage, and we'll have some advantages coming up in now this final qualifying stage. And you're going to see Canada's best crop and certainly Canada's best generation, as you say, golden generation. This is the best team that the Canadian men's national team has ever been able to put out. There were some phenomenal players of the past, yes, but you have several star players and top class players on the exact same team at the same time right now. So to see them go up against Mexico and the United States and Costa Rica and Honduras, the best teams in the region, I'm excited to see what this Canadian men's national team can do. This next stretch, these 14 games are going to be amongst the most important 14 games in Canadian men's national team history.
Wow. Okay, so I don't need you to call your shot just yet. But again, qualification for the World Cup in Qatar next year. Right now, as we're recording this, first in the group, do we have a chance? Could we see Canada in the World Cup 4 years earlier than, us hosting it?
They have a real shot at doing it. I mentioned that, coming up against Mexico, the States, and Costa Rica in this qualifying stage, they have 14 tries to finish in the top 4 in this group and book a spot in Qatar. And I really think that, their class is exceptional. They have the chance to do it, and they'll have the benefit of going down to play Mexico at the Azteca Stadium in an empty stadium, something that will be a huge advantage for Canada, because that can be one of the most hostile environments in all of soccer, let alone in CONCACAF in this North American region. So to be able to go down there and not have to deal with the crowd and just focus on the game and the 11 players in front of you, that will be a massive advantage for this Canadian team. That some very good Canadian teams that featured Dwayne Di Rosario and Craig Forrest and Jimmy Brennan and Jason DeVos and great players of the past, that's an advantage that they didn't have. So I think if Canada can take advantage of that in September, when this final stage of qualifying starts, running through to March, the games are coming thick and fast. And I think that is also a huge advantage. Usually in international soccer, you have these long breaks, but because of the interruptions of COVID to the calendar and trying to get the qualification in as quickly as possible, you're going to see these games coming very quickly, which is a real benefit to these players and an opportunity to develop some chemistry. And for John Herdman, he's got a team in a very good place right now beginning this. So very excited to see, what happens in September. And, I believe that Canada will come out as one of the top 4 teams here and look to qualify for Qatar.
Why not us, right? Why not us?
About time.
Brendan, great talking to you. Really enjoying the podcast. Thanks so much for your time.
Hey, thanks for having me. Anytime.
And that is Brendan Dunlop, host of the Toronto Stars Euro 2020 football podcast, Headers and Footers. You can catch the podcast daily with the tournament on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Adrian Chung, Saba Aitazaz, and Raju Muthar. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattinen, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Let's talk soon.